Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. It is time to talk weather here the week before Christmas. And joining us right now, based in Denver, Colorado, it is Matt Makens with Makens Weather. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How about you all?
I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
It's that time of the year is the holiday season. Everyone's getting all ramped up for Christmas. Everybody's talking, is it a brown Christmas? Is it a white Christmas? Let's talk about some of the forecast here. Let's start in eastern and central Canada. What do you kind of see on the horizon right now when it comes to the weather pattern?
Kind of the biggest tipping point, if you want to call it that, not to make it sound dramatic, but it is going to be the pattern changer, if you will, should be coming between now and say January 15th. And by that, I mean, there's some activity that happens up way up high above the pole. And how that area behaves late December, early January in this year's case is really going to be telling on how much cold we can get to the east or the central areas and how much moisture. Right now, as you know, Canada's been warm. I mean, it's been a very warm fall, warm winter thus far. So we're trying to break that down. And if the pole, it's polar vortex area, but if that can cause a change to change the pattern we're in now, it should be between now and the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so where's that cold air that's going to come from the north down and push it lower, or what?
So yeah, basically, everything in the atmosphere bases on stretches and pulls. So where you stretch something, you got to contract somewhere else to make up the balance. It's always in balance. And we're seeing some behavior of way up above the pole. It kind of wants to stretch out. So over Canada, it would kind of shrink down and trap some cold air over us, basically. But this phenomenon has kind of toyed with us over the past couple of weeks. Sometimes it looks like it's going to do its thing, and it hasn't. But I think for kind of to set the tone for the rest of winter and next spring, we want this thing to do its deal, and we want to get some cooler air, and that can help some moisture too. I'm still kind of leaning toward a hot winter for Canada, and we'll see the next couple of weeks because it really needs to change if it's going to. It kind of will tell us the behavior for the rest of the winter and the spring based on the next couple of weeks.
Okay, that's interesting. So, because we have seen some, really untimely, really wet weather, especially when you get out to the Atlantic coast, like, talking to farmers in like Nova Scotia and raining on like crazy every day, and sort of been real frustration getting through that corn harvest. So that it's been kind of a settling of warm air, and then moisture's kind of come at the same time.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of these systems are riding from, say, the Gulf of Mexico across Florida, up the eastern seaboard of the States, and then hitting, far eastern Canada. There's some other factors too, but that's kind of been one storm flow. And then a secondary one is some storms that kind of hit around Montana, North Dakota, go across the prairies, head north of the Great Lakes. So there's kind of a coming together, kind of a flow coming together there over the east. And that would change too if this temperature pattern would change over the next couple of weeks.
So does that same pattern or the same conditions that we're seeing in central Canada, say in Ontario, is that carrying down through the eastern Corn Belt as well?
It does. We're not getting the moisture down there, but it is all connected. And if we go back to the scenario between now and the next few weeks, is if we can somehow change this pattern over Canada, it would take that eastern Canadian water, moisture, put it over the Corn Belt for a time, and then over southeastern states. So it would kind of, it would act to drop everything or sink it down farther south over the coming weeks.
Okay. Now that we can come back to the eastern side of the continent a little bit later, but I got to ask you, what the heck is going on the western side of the continent? I remember I saw you last year. That's where I first met you, was at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the Cattle Con last year. And there was a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to this La Niña switch. And you said you don't really kind of know when it moisture will show itself because of that switch. Matt, we are dry again.
Yeah.
And there is I'll tell you, man, there is a boatload of concern with this warmer winter. There's a lot of people, even in northern Saskatchewan, talk about brown Christmas. Everyone's kind of scratching their head, like, what is in front of us here in 24?
Well, when we bring up the discussion of El Nino or La Nina, the impact, the correlation to weather is much higher on the states than it is Canada.
Okay.
El Nino has some impact, Central West. Most of that impact is winter and spring, and that impact is to keep things warmer. La Nina is really when we get the sharper cold, the cold that just won't budge. And La Nina used to be a good snow producer for the West and the mountains and Peace region down through the prairies. It used to be. And I'm not saying we're not going back to that. There's other big factors that would take 3 hours for you and I to go through. But since about 1998, we've seen kind of a global pattern change where La Nina is favored. And for Canada, part of that would be, well, we're going to get more snow. But part of that change around 98 was no, the La Ninas going forward will be drier. And then, say 2030, whenever the global pattern shifts again, we'll start getting back into that tradition. Uh, but with that said, El Nino can bring really good moisture to southern BC. It can bring snow into the mountains. And I say can with like put it in italics, bold, underline with the stars on either side. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the strength of El Nino is so critical. The strength of El Nino, and I'm talking about how much the atmosphere responds to this ocean pattern. If it's really full bore, like the atmosphere is like, I'm going to be the strongest Nino atmosphere ever, look out, you're going to be hot and you're going to be dry in the prairies in the West. And then as you work down that in weaker El Ninos on down to maybe moderate or neutral, almost no El Nino signature, that's when you do better with getting moisture to the prairies, the mountains, British Columbia in the winter and spring. And this year, as you kind of already probably have guessed, with people saying it's hot and we're
Yeah.
around Christmas, you can see where we're headed. We're in like a top, not quite top five as of today, but we're in a top 10 kind of Nino atmosphere. And that's really showing its drawing, warming impact on us over the last couple of weeks. And that's likely to continue.
So are we locked in on that? Is that like, because we're all, one thing I've learned in talking to people like yourself is that, we're always cheering, depending on much we like the current situation, we're cheering for the events that have to happen to create that alternate path, right?
Right.
So is this like a locked in thing, or are there opportunities for certain things to happen to shift the pattern?
Well, this El Nino is going to be very short lived. It'll fade out really fast this spring. By summer, we may have La Nina back or headed quickly in that direction. So, no, this pattern is not locked in. I mean, it is kind of for the winter.
Yep.
We'll see a transition in the spring and summer. And then by this time next year, we're likely in a full bore La Nina. And that goes back to, I say all the time, 1998. That was a critical time when the global pattern just shifts. And these things take decades to transition. But since that period, La Nina is far more common. It lasts a lot longer. El Ninos are weaker. So this El Nino will go away. And for me, a lot of time we talk about getting locked into a pattern. Like we're locked into La Nina. That's when we see the impact. I'm a transitions guy. I like the periods when, whether it's El Nino or La Nina or any other weather oscillation
Yep.
pattern, I like those transitional periods. The transition is a time when our opportunity for water uh, is highest, in my opinion.
Okay.
So as we go from the transition from this El Nino this winter, okay, so spring would be a transitional period and part of the summer too. That's going to be a chance for us to not say we're El Nino, we're not saying we're La Nina, and we can get some water into the prairies. And that'll probably be the best chance for a spring and early summer.
We're basically cheering for the opportunity for chaos in that gray area, that gray zone.
Yeah. I like transitions. And that's the same down here where I am in the Rockies. A transitional part of a phase does more for me than being locked into one phase or the other. It's the change.
Is it like, is it kind of the western half? of the like, are we all kind of in the same boat on the western half of North America? Like as you go from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana through Idaho, Utah, down through Colorado and into Texas, are we all kind of in the same boat? But obviously there's different levels of significance to the pattern, but are we all
Yeah,
kind of dry?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, like when we're full in an El Nino, you're going to do better from, say, central Colorado south to Mexico. There's going to be water there. North of Denver, Cheyenne, up through Montana, up to Calgary, Edmonton, Peace region. Those areas typically are drier with El Ninos. But the transitional phase, like when there's not one dominating, that's when everybody kind of along the Rocky Mountain chain, we're pretty darn similar. We're pretty similar in those cases. Other than down in Arizona, they get the monsoon late summer, and that can spread it into Mexico, Utah, Colorado.
Yeah.
But just by and large, yeah, we're in a similar boat. The mountains are a lot of that. Uh, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Arizona did not get the late summer monsoon this year, just got more and more heat.
Yeah, was
Um,
locked in the heat and sent the rain just a little bit to the west there.
yeah, so what changed so you mentioned this 1998. So why is that you explained like what happened after the fact but what was the creation of that change?
There, let's think of El Nino and La Nina for a minute. That is a phenomenon in the right along the equator of the Pacific Ocean. And when you warm it by a couple of degrees Celsius or cool it from average for a couple of degrees Celsius, that's when you get El Nino and La Nina. And that's happens like 12 months, 18, 24 months on a scale like that. But as you look at the Pacific, mostly northern Pacific, and Atlantic, mostly northern Atlantic, there are these pockets where there's hotter than normal ocean and colder than normal ocean. And they kind of lock into a phase, if you will. And gradually over time, maybe those two blobs switch places.
Mm-hmm.
That creates a different atmosphere above it because it's like a fuel source or robbing energy from the atmosphere, if you will. Those big ocean basins, they happen on time scales not like El Nino or La Nina of a year or two or three. These are 20 or 30 or 40-year patterns, very slow, but they're referred to. If you I talk about them in speeches, some other weather guys do too. They're called the PDO and the AMO. they their phases dictate how much drought we may be in. And there was a critical change to the Atlantic in the late 90s. It changed its phase, it changed its orientation of cooler pockets of water, and that changed the atmosphere. And again, it takes about 20, 30, maybe 35, 40 years for these things to flip back. And for Canada and a lot of the US, especially our grain production areas and cattle areas,
Yeah, the wheat belt for sure.
for sure, we need that Atlantic to flip, and that puts us in a wetter regime. How it is now, drought is far more common from, say, our grain, cereal grains, cattle, up through your prairies. We're kind of locked into a more frequent drought phase. And that happened around the late 90s. And there's some other things too. There's some correlation to solar cycles and things, but
Yeah.
you know, but it's a big global pattern changer with those two big ocean basins.
So basically warm winter, and then as we move into spring, that's our transition, our opportunity for change. We could, if everything goes right, we're essentially cheering for maybe a bit of a late spring. If this pattern was to change, we actually might get some moisture.
Yeah, yeah. I think temperatures, January, perhaps times of February, BC, the Northwest, parts of Alberta, parts of Saskatchewan, you may get some shots of cold. So don't think you're not going to get some winter.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's the odds are very warm, warmer as you go east, and that will stay through spring and summer. What will change is some of these pockets of real dry air and the very wet air, they'll start to moderate a bit. So we'll spread out the playing field, if you will. We'll bring in some moisture to the prairies. Probably not like a surplus, like, whoa, back up, we got too much. probably not that kind of case, but enough to be like, okay, we're timing out okay. Grains are coming up. We're warm. We're needing that next dose of moisture. We may get it. Uh, I think dugouts, stock water, stream flows. That's probably not favorable. But to get some moisture in spring and early summer, it does look like we'll get some pockets coming back through.
Matt, really appreciate you joining us here today. We are cheering for the best possible news that we can get in some of these parts, especially the western half of North America. Really appreciate you joining us, and we'll chat with you again soon. Merry Christmas to you.
Sounds good. Merry Christmas.